But I'd like to sort of move over to beginners with disabilities. And I think this is really interesting because for several reasons. The first is that if you want to make something accessible, the advice I've been given is that you have to think about accessibility from the very beginning. You can't just add it on as an afterthought, just as you can't add security on as an afterthought. Accessibility has to fit into the whole design of the thing. And the second thing is that if we get more people with disabilities using tech, the beginners is where it will start. And if you make tech more accessible for beginners, then those beginners will progress and they will bring with them the desire for accessibility, and they will bring with them the requirements for disability, and the developer community can follow along with that. So one of the things I'm quite keen on is producing accessible outputs for small documents and simple documents, and solve that problem so it really works properly, and then move on to bigger documents rather than start with the big documents and then leave the easy stuff for later. I've started to make steps to create a LaTeX typing tutor, and I'll just outline the architecture. Anybody that wants to write exercises for the typing tutor creates a file and puts it in their GitHub repository in such a way that we can find it. Anybody that wants to have some LaTeX exercises goes to the typing tutor, loads the app into their web browser, and they're presented with a collection of exercises from all the people that have published exercises. So people published exercises, and you can just choose which ones you want. And every set of exercises will have a URL. So you can say, this is a good set of exercises. I think you should try it because it's relevant for you. And somebody who's given a course in logic produce a whole bunch of logic exercises for their students to look at, so that it's specific for that particular group and it doesn't have the extraneous stuff like differential equations. Now, I'm starting very simple, which is a tutor where you see, if you're sighted, a piece of LaTeX mathematics, and you have to type the tech that produces it. And it's got a nice interface and so forth, and it's a good starting point. It's enough to get things going. Because I've got involved in accessibility, this question has been nagging away at me at the back of my mind. What about the people with disabilities? What can you provide for them? And if the person can't even see what they're supposed to write the tech for, how can they learn LaTeX from it? So an accessible LaTeX typing tutor has to be sonic. For the view has to be sonic. So it has to speak out the mathematical equation that is to be, what's the word? Typed into LaTeX. I think that's the only way you can do it. Or you maybe it's, yeah, well, that's one way to do it. So the app will speak out x squared plus y squared equals z squared. And the student has to type that. And the usual criteria for correctness comes out. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing, and I think this is potentially quite interesting and important, is that there's what's called a model view controller architecture, which goes back to the work of Alan Kay in the 70s, I think. And the three components of the model view and architecture are somewhat independent. Well, they work together, but you can replace the view with a different view, and you can replace the controller with a different controller. So the model is, so to speak, the inner state of the system, and that should be the same for all the users. So a banking app is a banking app is a banking app, and it has to allow the person to do banking, and it has to provide banking information. But how the banking information is presented is a question of the view, and how the user communicates with the banking app is a question of the controller. So the controller could be the keyboard, it could be the mouse, or it could be the audio. And the view could be sonic or braille or visual. And the Elm architecture is quite interesting because there's a part of the system that's called the view, and I see no reason, I think it's called the view, and there's no reason why you shouldn't swap that out and replace it by something completely different. But you won't be able to do that unless you design the whole thing from the beginning from that point of view, from the point of view that the sighted person's view of the application is just one view of the application, and the person who has a visual disability has a different view, and the controller for somebody who has motor problems will be different from somebody who is proficient with the keyboard, and so forth. So changing the controller and changing the view is an accessibility adaptation. And if you can keep those components independent in such a way that you can reliably change those components as adaptations, without damaging the integrity of the application, I think you're on to it. So that's, if you like, the theory. And I'm quite keen to at least do some experiments on a LaTeX tutor for disabled use. And that could include for people who are blind. I've no idea if I can succeed with that, but at least I can try and open the door and allow somebody else to go through that door. So that's the end of my little speech. I'm told that after you stop speaking and nobody talks, it means that they either understand everything or they understand nothing. But I know there are numbers between 0 and 1.
I think it's a very good idea, Jonathan. It's a worthy experiment. And if one tries to do something very limited, it should be possible to do something in limited time.
I think what you need is what I think is trendily referred to as a minimum viable product, an MVP. What's the quickest way you can demonstrate it?
But Jonathan seems to be a consummate minimalist. So.
Great, sir, great.
Sanchit, come in.
Yes, sir, great. Starting with the initial accessibility is good point, and it's interesting to learn through the accessible tutor app, because the people there are having motor disability, they cannot type through the keyboard, and also the accessible tutor app will definitely help. App, website, or software, any. So that's my take, and yeah.
I think that the problem of accessibility for somebody who is sight impaired will be easier, because there are existing things that are not too difficult that you could use to rig up something that would speak the task to be done to the user, who could then type responses. If you have to, for somebody who's motor impaired, I mean, one way to do it would be via voice commands, but that's a much more difficult problem.
For voice commands, you'd have a speech recognizer that would, so to speak, feed commands into whichever app it was told to. And I've no, a sort of high power Alexa, if you like. And I've no idea how that actually works in practice. I've seen a blind colleague at the Open University use that sort of thing quite effectively. This is something where a software developer like me is not the expert, and you really need somebody who knows about assistive technology and disability. And sometimes, and just like ordinary people, disabled people are different. And so I get the sense that there's no such thing as a universal concept of accessibility. And the adaptations to different people is important. I think it's really important to make an attempt at the beginning. And if you fail, let it be an interesting and documented failure. If you stub your toe against a rock in the road, you can move it out of the way for somebody else, or at least point out that there's that problem.